Mike Sielski over at Philly.com and the Inquirer has a column on Game 3 where he says the Flyers and their fans gave in to the worst instincts. Way to go, Flyers is the title. And, I wonder what kind of reaction Mike is getting today. That's really the first thing I want to know. Are people supportive of the column, Mike, or are they basically showing their true colors and throwing things at you?
A little bit of both, Mike. I've gotten some very supportive emails. The latest one I've gotten was not supportive. The entirety of the email, it was 2 words long, and it would be the opposite of down mind. So think about that, and I think you get what the email said.
Very clever, Mike Sielski. I think you might have replaced Tim Panaccio as the most hated guy in Flyerdom, right?
Well, I don't have Panaccio's taste in wine or his appetite for that or Marriott points. So I'm not quite in his league yet, I don't think.
And you don't have a lower body injury either, by the way.
That's true.
So
that's true.
The Flyers essentially wrote your column last night, but that's not what you expected walking into the building. How disgusted were you?
I was upset. Not upset, that's the wrong word. I mean, I was disappointed by what happened. This comes up again and again and again, and because A, of Philadelphia sports fans' reputation, and B, because they keep kind of promulgating that reputation. I mean, look, last night was an exciting night going into it. The idea of, the Flyers honoring Ed Snider after his death, and, here's their chance to kind of get back in a series that, if you had any realistic expectations, you knew they weren't going to win anyway. It would be a very, very slim chance they were going to beat the Capitals 4 out of 7 times. But it was going to be an intriguing night nonetheless. And then everything falls apart in the third period. And it falls apart both on the ice in that the Flyers, get to the point where they fall back into what they do when they're getting beat soundly in a playoff series, and often during the regular season, they start a fracas on the ice, and it falls apart more in the stands when you get these people throwing, the wristbands and the bracelets, whatever you want to call it, onto the ice. And, believe me, I would like nothing more than to just write about what's happening on the field or on the court or on the ice. But as long as the Flyers in particular are going to kind of fall back into this kind of reaction to getting beaten soundly, and as long as Philadelphia sports fans are going to react this way when one of their teams is getting beaten soundly, then, you have to keep addressing the issue.
Mike Sielski, by the way, promulgate, promote, or make widely known.
I looked it up, too.
That being said, I want to get your opinion because I really think your columns are spot on a lot of times with this kind of stuff, Mike, getting the pulse of this fan base. Is it fair that this is described as the Philadelphia sports fans, or is it more a microcosm of sports fans in general? When you put 20 to 65,000 in any arena, you're going to get 1 to 1,000 knuckleheads somewhere, and that because we're in this bubble, it's more highly publicized? Or are the Philadelphia fans on a higher level of ineptitude in terms of their performance in the stands than other fan bases?
Well, what I think is you can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, laud the passion and intensity and knowledge of Philadelphia sports fans, and every athlete I've ever talked to agrees that Philadelphia is a different place to play, that the fans care more, they're louder, they're more intense, all those things. You can't have that and then very well say, well, this kind of stuff happens everywhere. So therefore it doesn't matter when it happens in Philadelphia. It does happen in a lot of different places, but it doesn't happen. It seems to me it doesn't happen with the same frequency, and it's not generally accepted as part of the sports culture in a way that this kind of behavior seems to be in Philadelphia. I don't see how we get around that, and I don't see how, as I said, people try to have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to be passionate and if you're going to boo because you paid the money and you're entitled to boo and yell and scream, and some people have argued to me today that you're entitled to throw the stuff on the ice because, hey, I paid all this money for a ticket and the Flyers played terribly and quit on me. Well, that's fine. You feel that way, you feel that way. But when someone like me comes along and says that this behavior is petulant and childish and boorish, and it tarnishes everyone and everything about Philadelphia sports by bringing the reputation of the entire fan base and the entire city down, well, then you can't complain. Okay, you cannot have it both ways. And if the price of, say, Charlotte is that they have a less passionate fan base when it comes to, say, the Carolina Panthers or the Carolina Hurricanes, but they don't have as many incidents like this, okay, then there's the trade-off. But if you're going to be this passionate, then you got to live with the criticism that comes when you cross the line. And it seems to me that Philadelphia crosses the line more than most places, if not all places.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly fair. I also, look at it this way, Mike. I don't know how many guys were covering that game last night. I'm going to estimate the Philadelphia media had 40 to 50, whereas other hockey teams specifically, you might have a Phoenix team that has one beat guy as opposed to 40 or 50 covering a game where it gets out on so many more mediums. Now, last night I think was different, but, in St. Louis last night there's reports that, the fans were using racial slurs at Jason Hayward, and I don't think that that's publicized quite as much as, say, the Flyers game last night. And I think the St. Louis Cubs baseball game probably on a national stage has more attention than Flyers Capitals, no?
Well, yeah, but all these games are on TV and available to be watched anywhere. I mean, nothing is private anymore when it comes to Philadelphia sports. I'm not sure, how relevant that is, that the idea that because the Flyers have more beat writers than, say, the St. Louis Cardinals do, that something like this is going to get out more often. It's going to get out one way or another. Everybody's watching everything. You have access to everything. Hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people have the MLB package. I'm sure there were people in the Philadelphia area, precious few, who might have been watching the Cubs-Cardinals game last night. So I don't think that's it. I think this is Philadelphia has a reputation that is well-founded and that is based in large part on reality. And does that mean every single sports fan in Philadelphia is a bore? Of course not. Of course it doesn't. But just because every single Philadelphia sports fan isn't a jerk doesn't mean that Philadelphia's sports culture and the area doesn't have a problem with jerks. And it certainly seems to me that we do. And you can be passionate and you can root like heck for the Flyers, and you can be disappointed that they lost 6-1 and they didn't put up a good effort in the third period. But that doesn't give you the right to violate the rules of decency and decorum and act like a jerk. It just doesn't. And this happens all the time. And it happens on a micro level too, guys. I mean, look, I walked out of the 2003-2004 NFC Championship game when the Eagles lost to the Carolina Panthers, and Donovan McNabb, got hurt in the first or second quarter of that game and continued playing as long as he could and threw 3 interceptions. And the things that people said about him on the way out of that stadium, I wouldn't repeat to either my sons or my wife or anything. And that's not everybody, but that's enough that it's part of the issue. It's part of the atmosphere. It's part of the problem. And until those people and those of us who don't like that behavior and who want to see less of it start calling it out in places where we can, it's going to continue. I've gotten tweets today, oh, you took the easy way out by ripping the fans. Well, no offense, but if you wrote anything about that game other than what happened in the third period, right, you weren't doing your job in covering the game. It was the only thing anybody was going to talk about, and the idea that we should be ripping the Flyers or Claude Giroux or anything like that, those sorts of things, the power play and that sort of thing, all those presumptions come with all those arguments come with the presumption that the Flyers were going to be in the series to begin with. They were never going to win this series. This was going to be a 4 or 5 game series from the jump. That's how good the Capitals are. That's how hard the Flyers had to push just to get in the playoffs. And yet, even amid that environment, you still saw this kind of behavior from Philadelphia fans. Like, I'm tired of it. I got to be honest. I'm tired of it, and I think a lot of people in the area are tired of it. And until we start calling it out and saying for what it is, it's going to continue.
Mike Sielski with us, the award-winning columnist from the Philadelphia Inquirer, has a column up today about the ugly incident last night. Well, Mike, let's circle around back to before the ugliness, where the night was supposed to be, or to start out, about Mr. Snider and honoring Ed Snider. So you certainly have a history, or had a history, with battles with him. If you could illuminate us a little bit about, or enlighten us a little bit. I'm not as good at your words, pal. I'm just going to admit it. But if you could just tell us some stories about your dealings with Mr. Snider and your memories of him.
Well, look, I was like a lot of reporters and people who covered the Flyers over the years. I went back and forth with him once or twice, including once right after I got hired by the Inquirer at a press conference where I asked him a couple questions, and he didn't like the nature of the questions I was asking him, and it led to this kind of whole culture change motif that's kind of persisted ever since. Look, he cared about that franchise more than just about any owner has ever cared about another franchise. And in a lot of ways, he was the Flyers, for good and for not so good sometimes. Let's not forget something. One thing that I didn't point out in my column today, but I think had I had more time would have been worth noting, is that yes, it was completely disrespectful for Philadelphia, for Flyers fans and people there last night to do what they did in throwing those bracelets and wristbands on the ice, especially on the first home game after Ed Snider's death. And it was disrespectful. It was anti the message and the theme of the night, which is we're here to honor Ed Snider, and hopefully his hockey team will play well and maybe squeeze out a victory in a series they're not supposed to win. I get all that. I acknowledge all that. All of that is true. But don't forget that Ed Snider could be a lousy loser, too. Ed Snider, after the Flyers lost Game 6 of the 1980 Stanley Cup Finals, said that the head of NHL officiating should be shot. He said that to Ray Dittinger,
oh,
who was
man,
working at the Philadelphia Bulletin at the time. He said it on the record in a long, long rant about the fact that the Flyers had lost to the Islanders and the officiating was questionable. In 1999, he questioned the integrity of Terry Gregson, another NHL official, who had called a penalty late in the game that led to a Flyers playoff loss at the end of their season. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that everybody who threw stuff on the ice last night had Ed Snider in their thoughts, but what I am saying is that this kind of mentality sometimes filters from the top down, okay? And there's been a long history of the Flyers kind of having this the world is against us sort of mentality, that everybody's out to get us because we're the Broad Street Bullies, and the NHL didn't like the way we played, and they didn't like the fact that we won 2 Stanley Cups, and so, we turn into this kind of combination of Oliver North and Gordie Howe, Oliver Stone and Gordie Howe. Where there's a conspiracy and a grassy knoll behind every bad call. And I do think that plays in the fan base. I do think that there is that mentality among a segment of Flyers fans. And so, when the game gets out of hand, or when penalties are called, it's, the refs are against us. Oh, this or that, here we go again. And look, last night was beautiful. They handled the ceremony very, very well. It was classy, it was gracious, it was all those things, and it's a shame that it was besmirched. But the idea that Ed Snider, would have I'm sure he wouldn't have liked them fans throwing things on the ice, but the idea that he handled every single bad moment in Flyers history with graciousness and class is just not true. It's not. He crossed the line sometimes, and that needs to be factored in here too.
Mike Sielski, great column. Read it. I don't know if he used besmirched in that article, but I enjoyed that as well.
This vocabulary is I think I have a decent vocabulary.
He beat you.
Is
he
blowing me away.
He crushed you. Mike, always a pleasure, my man, and good article at Philly.com. Pick up an Inquirer and read it with your bare hands.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.